The Sokolov family, parents Oleg and Marina and their children 10-year-old Anya and 6-year-old Kostya, had finally moved into their new home. The house, on the outskirts of a small town, was old, with a high stone facade and creaky floorboards, but spacious and seemed ideal for a new life. Oleg thought it was a good find. The price was lower than expected, and the house was big enough for everyone. Neighbors had casually mentioned that there had once been an orphanage here, but Marina thought that only added to the history and charm of the house. The children, however, felt uneasy from the start. The walls of the house, cold and thick, seemed to absorb sounds, causing footsteps and voices to echo along the long corridors. Anya and Kostya said that at night they heard strange whispers coming from somewhere in the walls, but their parents brushed it off. "It's just the wind," Marina reassured them. "The house is old, that's why it creaks. Don't make things up." But the whispers didn't stop. On the very first night, Anya woke Kostya up when she heard someone calling her name from behind the wall. The voice was quiet, hoarse, almost plaintive. Kostya, scared, hid under the blanket, but he soon heard his name, pronounced in the same tone. The next day, the children told Marina and Oleg about it. Oleg just laughed. "You're imagining things too much. Maybe the wind is blowing through the ventilation." But when night fell again, the whispers returned. Anya clearly heard "help" pronounced from the other side of the wall near her bed. She jumped up, trying to wake Kostya, but he was already crying, covering his ears. "Mom, there's someone there!" she screamed, but when Marina and Oleg entered the room, everything was quiet. "Children, this is too much. Calm down, it's just your imagination," Marina said firmly, but her voice wavered. Something in the children's eyes, in their genuine fear, made her feel that perhaps they weren't just making it up. A week passed and the strangeness in the house began to intensify. The children no longer simply heard whispers, they began to notice shadows that flickered in the corners of rooms or glided along the corridors. Kostya said that at night he saw how someone's hand touched his blanket, but no one was nearby. Anya began to wake up with the feeling that someone was sitting on the edge of her bed, but as soon as she opened her eyes, the bed turned out to be empty. Marina and Oleg continued to write it off as the children's imagination, but one night Marina herself woke up with a strange sensation. It seemed to her that someone was staring at her. Opening her eyes, she saw a dark silhouette by the bedroom window. When she turned on the nightlight, the shadow disappeared. In the morning, she told Oleg about it, but he just shrugged. "You're too tired, that's why it's just a fantasy." He waved it off. But Marina was no longer sure. With each passing day, the house became more alien and sinister. One evening, when the family was gathered for dinner, Kostya suddenly froze, staring into the corner of the room, his face turned pale. "Who is that?" he asked quietly, pointing to the dark corner. No one else saw anything, but a cold wind suddenly blew through the room, although all the windows were closed. Later, when Oleg went down to the basement to check the old plumbing, he felt something touch his shoulder. It was a cold, almost dead touch. He turned around sharply, but no one was there. At that moment, it seemed to him that someone's pale, emaciated figure was looking at him from around the corner, but it disappeared before he could concentrate. The next day, Anya, looking through an old closet in the attic, found a box of photographs. There were children in the pictures, dozens of children lined up in groups, dressed in old, worn-out clothes. Their faces were gloomy, but the strangest thing was in their eyes. Each of them seemed scared. In the corner of one of the photos, she saw a man in a long coat. His face was blurry, as if someone had deliberately ruined the photo. When Anya showed the photos to her parents, Marina felt an inexplicable anxiety. Maybe it's because there was an orphanage here, she suggested, but Oleg was skeptical. However, at night, when he went down to the first floor for water, he felt the air become heavy. The silence was ringing, and it seemed to him that somewhere from the walls he could hear a quiet whisper. It was a child's voice, barely audible, but very distinct. "Please, help us." When Oleg turned his head, he saw in the reflection of the window several children's faces looking at him from the darkness. The night was dark and quiet, too quiet. Marina woke up with a heavy feeling of anxiety. Usually Kostya would toss and turn in his sleep, and Anya would sometimes whisper something incomprehensible. Now there was a ringing silence in the house. At first she thought it was just fatigue, but turning around, she noticed that their beds were empty. "Oleg, the kids!" she called, shaking her husband anxiously. Oleg jumped up, and together they ran to the children's room, but neither Anya nor Kostya were there. The blankets were neatly straightened, as if the children had gotten up and left on their own. But the cold in the room was almost tangible. "Anya!" Marina screamed, searching the house. But there was no answer, only a whisper, quiet, as if coming from far away, from the walls themselves. The voices seemed familiar, children's. These were the voices of Anya and Kostya. Oleg ran to the basement, Marina to the attic, but the children seemed to have disappeared. However, their voices grew louder, and now they were filled with fear and despair. "Mom! Dad! Help!" Marina ran to the corridor, from where, as it seemed to her, the screams were coming. She froze in front of the wall, feeling like her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. "Oleg!" she screamed. Oleg came running, but he himself stopped dead in his tracks. On the wall, right in front of them, outlines began to appear, at first blurry, as if from fog, and then more and more distinct. These were the faces of their children. Anya and Kostya looked at them from the wall, their eyes full of horror. Their mouths were moving, but the voice sounded strange, as if from somewhere deep inside. "Mom? Dad, help!" Marina threw herself at the wall, her hands tugging at the old wallpaper, trying to get to the children. "No, no, it can't be!" she screamed. But the more she tried, the more the voices faded and the faces became less distinct. "We have to get them out!" Oleg screamed, but as soon as he touched the wall, the cold penetrated him to the bone. It felt like someone's hand was grabbing him from inside the wall. He pulled back, feeling fear fill his mind. The shadows on the walls began to come to life, and the voices multiplied. They could hear dozens of voices now. These were other children who had once lived here. "They won't let us go," and "You too," they whispered, their words merging into one hum. Suddenly, the house shook, the light began to fade, and the walls seemed alive. Marina and Oleg tried to run out, but there was no way back. Stairs, doors, everything led them into endless corridors. Voices haunted them, growing louder until the house swallowed them up completely. The next day, the neighbors noticed that the house had become quiet, as if the family that had recently moved in had never existed. When the new tenants came to inspect the house again, they noticed an old photograph hanging on the wall. It showed a family with 2 children. The faces were blurry, but something about their poses and figures seemed eerily familiar.